Hey, everybody. I'm Jordan Tenenbaum, the host of the Celigo Technology Leaders podcast. I'm the social media manager over here at Celigo. And today we are joined by a very special guest, Josh Rangel, the SVP of social media at Golin. Josh, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good, Jordan. Excited to be here.
Fantastic, man. I'm very, very excited to have you on. For those listening, my typical co-host, Mark Simon, our Vice President of Strategy, is out today. So it's just the two of us, but let's jump right into it. The first thing that I wanted to ask you, Josh, I think a lot of people know you from your fantastic work on in social media in general, but also specifically on LinkedIn. But I don't think a lot of people know too much about your history. So could you tell us just a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to where you are in your career?
Sure. Currently, as you mentioned, I'm an SVP of social media at Golan, and I've been at Golan for what is now going on 18 years. It will be 18 years in December, which in agency life is a lifetime. But how I got there was after I graduated college. I went to school for marketing. Came out at a time when jobs weren't all that plentiful. Went on rounds and rounds of interviews, and then finally landed a job actually in radio at a radio station which no longer exists in Chicago. It was called 94.7 The Zone. It was an alternative rock radio station. And I had interned there while I was in college, ended up getting a job there in the promotions department. So that was, kind of being the face of the radio station, going out and going to events and talking to listeners and really being the face and what people interacted with when they had their first contact with the radio station. So did that for about 2 years, and kind of was in a position where I wanted to do something different. And my sister put me in contact with a friend of hers who was a PR professional at Edelman, and he recommended to me to get an internship. And at this point, it was a little bit, not necessarily right out of school, so I didn't know if an internship was right, but I knew I wanted to move my career, and so ended up seeking out an internship. Ended up getting an internship at Edelman for 6 months. Great experience, and this was more in the PR field. So I was doing media lists and pitching the media, helping develop press releases and things like that. And so after Edelman, I got a full-time job at Golan, which is where I'm currently at, and did that. Was a PR generalist. Again, keep doing media pitches, media relations, writing press releases, those types of things that you do. And I think I was okay at it. I wasn't going to say I'm the best at it, but so at some point, social media came around, and I got asked to do research, what is now would be considered influencer research, but to do research around YouTube creators who were developing content. And this was around 2008. So it
Early
was
years.
super early. Yeah, right. Like I think YouTube was only 2 years old at that point. But they weren't called influencers yet. So I did some research for this Klondike campaign. Klondike bar was a client of ours back then. And, did this research for them. And I was like, this is really interesting. I really like this. And so then started to kind of raise my hand. Hey, any more work like this we can do? And then one of my colleagues, who was one of our only social media folks at the time, said, hey, go sign up for Twitter and for Facebook. Not only yourself, but sign up Klondike. And I'm like, what are those things? I knew what Facebook was, but I didn't know what Twitter was. And so signed up, and I was the first social media manager for Klondike and for several other ice cream brands, Breyers, Popsicle, Magnum ice cream, and a couple others. So I helped build their social presences from nothing into kind of where they were at the point where we no longer were working with them. And then, I helped oversee some of that with some of my staff, some of my junior team members there. But I just kind of dug in, and I was like, I really like this. And that, I could say, was something I was actually good at. I really enjoyed it. I understood it, and went from there. And so kind of worked my way up from being kind of like a typical social media manager at that time, and into being more of a social media strategist, really focusing on the strategy development, content, overseeing the team that is doing kind of the day-to-day work. And, so we was working on Unilever ice cream for a while, then rolled onto the McDonald's account, where I helped kind of lead some of our earned media and earned communications programs from a social perspective. and from an influencer standpoint. And, over the course of, that was like 6 years, then rolled on to some other clients, Allstate, Grubhub, Dyson, to name a few. And now I'm back onto the McDonald's account in more of kind of a more senior role. And we work with them, their ad agencies, social agencies, and things like that. So, but now, more of the social media strategy, client counsel, oversight of the team who's kind of doing the day-to-day in the weeds work. So that's kind of been my evolution of where I've come from. Long-winded way of saying that.
That's really cool, man. It's interesting to hear about people coming from a really traditional media source like radio or print, and kind of through the early years of social media, kind of when it was really a wild west to what it is now is a really established channel of marketing, advertising, media in general. I'm curious, the hardest rock on the planet, is that a slogan that you came up with at the radio station that you worked at?
No, I didn't. I was not as involved in the creative elements back then, just mainly more of the communications of it.
No worries. I saw that tagline and I was like, man, that sounds like maybe something Josh could have created 20 years ago.
Absolutely. You're kind of right, Jordan.
Okay, well, perfect. So that's a fantastic introduction. And I think a lot of people have a pretty good idea of PR or a PR agency and what they do. But I don't think a lot of people, and I mean that in a very general sense. PR kind of has a rep, whether it's in, TV shows or in media in general. But what does, if you had to describe it to someone who's in the know, what does Golin do, and specifically you at Golin do for these customers? Obviously, you help with social media strategy. You help them generate ideas and ensure that their content is on point. That's a very basic introduction, what I just said. But if you had to describe it more in depth from your point of view, what do you do there, and what does Golin do for these companies in terms of social media?
So I'll start with, and this is a kind of a roundabout way of getting to the answer to the question, but one of my favorite phrases that Al Golin, who's the founder of our agency, said about PR, and kind of like just for somebody to understand. So he said, advertising is what you say about yourself. PR is what other people say about you, right? And so it's about reputation. It's about earning that trust and about earning kind of that advocacy with people, because you're not just getting put in front of them with time that you bought or things that you want to say. Ultimately, other people say it for you based on kind of what you put out there. And so what we do from a Golin standpoint is we are, a PR agency, but we really have a strong focus on creative and earned first ideas. And by that, I mean the things that are going to get in front of people and stop them in their tracks on their phone or on their laptops or tablets or whatever, and get them to stop and pause and look at it, right? Because the ideas that are earned first are the ones that really sing in social, because they capture your attention. And you can pay to get in front of people, and that's fine, and that's great. It has a role. But when we come from that earn first communication lens, because we believe that an earned idea can work in paid, but a paid idea always can't work in owned. It doesn't always work the other way around. So if we have an idea that can be shared on TikTok, that can be shared on Threads, that can be shared in Instagram stories, that can work in paid. So it's not always the other way around. And so that's one of the things that we try to do from that standpoint, is take the core principles of PR, of earning attention, and putting that into kind of modern day communications, which is really social first and social forward. That's how people are consuming a lot of their content and getting a lot of their news these days. And so that's kind of the main thing, is like we work with other agency partners on programs for campaign launches for our clients. So a new product launch, we'll work with the ad agency, the media buying agency, other multicultural agencies and things like that, and come up with, and support that product or service or idea that is being launched. But one of the things with Golin is that we try to kind of separate ourselves, is we don't always want to do matching luggage. We don't want to just PR the advertising campaign. We want to find things about, a way that we can communicate that idea in that campaign in a way that's going to be meaningful and relevant to people. Because if I just say, hey, buy this product now, it's new, it's fun, that can get glossed over. But if we figure out what people are talking about in culture and what matters to people and what this product, service, or our client, what that kind of what their kind of way in is, and marry that with kind of like a message that resonates in both of those things, like the Venn diagram, we feel like we got something. And that's kind of what we try to do, is we try to put our focus in that area that is going to be what matters to our client and what is getting talked about by people. That's gonna be relevant for them. So that's kind of what we do. And we do typical PR, typical media relations and PR programs and things like that. But we also do social media for our clients. Some of our clients are only social clients. We don't do their PR, and some of our clients are only PR, and we don't do their social. A lot of crisis communications when it comes to PR and comms. So we do a lot of that, internal, external communications. A lot, like I said, we have a lot of creative folks in our agency, creative specifically, that are developing creative for campaigns. So design, copywriting, a lot of that stuff. But I think the biggest separator is that we're earned first. Like, that's our focus when we're thinking of ideas and trying to bring campaigns to life.
That makes sense. That's a fantastic breakdown of it. And I'm curious, working in the internet space, where there's so much going on in terms of social, there's so much going on in terms of culture, there's so much going on in terms of multiple moving parts. How much of what you focus on is controlling the narrative, whether that's company generated or public generated, or embracing the narrative? And I know that's kind of a little bit of an esoteric term, but how do you look at that when there's virality going on and huge people having opinions left and right? Like, is your role to control that narrative, embrace it, or maybe somewhere in the middle?
I think it's somewhere in the middle, Jordan, because it's tough to, especially in 2023, right, to control the narrative as a brand, because ultimately your consumer, your customer, your audience, their experience with their brand is their experience. It's not what you tell them it is. And so it's really at some points embracing what the narrative is and how people are using it. Like, a brand might say, this is what the product is for, but this is how we're using it. And but the consumer will be like, well, this is how we're using it. Might be, not what the intended use is or the intended way they thought. But if it's a positive thing, you embrace that. If it's a negative thing in the way they're using it, that's where you're going to want to try and do a little bit more of the control. I'll give you an example. Years ago, this was probably 2014, 2015, I was working on the McDonald's account. This is when I first started on that. There was this narrative about McDonald's chicken McNuggets that they were made with this pink slime, pink goo, right? And that was the furthest thing from the truth. Somebody put that out there, and as you know, as being in the social space, things can take off without being verified or without that validation. And so that was a narrative that was being put out on the internet for years. And McDonald's didn't really kind of fight back. They just let other people own the narrative for that. And then, in concert with Golin and internally at McDonald's and some other agencies, we decided to take that narrative back and develop this program called Our Food, Your Questions. And before this, McDonald's was really, and again, this was early days of brand social. 2014 is not too early, but they didn't really engage much around kind of negative food narratives on social. And this was an opportunity for us and for McDonald's to say, actually, we can, because we have something to say. We can't let people own that part of the narrative of our brand because it's untrue. So we need to tell our story. So we started to insert ourselves in those conversations and actually clarify, no, this is what it is. This is how it's made. We did in-depth into kind of the suppliers and the manufacturers and kind of how chicken McNuggets are made, as well as kind of went on social and engaged with people. Like, actually, this is how it's made. This is what goes into it. And, even in certain instances, got people to retract, like certain accounts that I think it was like UberFacts or something like that stated something about it at the time. And then we went out to them and said, actually, no, this isn't the case. And they redacted that and took it down because that was really not the case. And so that was one of the things, that was a situation where when misinformation was spreading and kind of erroneous information was spreading, that was an opportunity for us to help a client control the narrative, or at least be a part of that story and tell it in the right way. And that was a lot of it. It was a 360 campaign. So it wasn't just done through social, but it was done on, paid media, TV, all that stuff. And eventually that pink slime conversation, which was, as part of McDonald's conversation, went from here all the way down, almost non-existent. Now I think it's more like a legacy type thing where people make fun of it and they say that, but it was more prominent. But when we started to take control of the narrative, completely went away.
It's wild that you mentioned that, because I remember Grant Imahara from Mythbusters,
Yeah, exactly,
wearing the cap in the factory when I was younger, saying, "Hey, this is how," rest in peace to Grant, love the guy. Saying this is how chicken nuggets are made. And I remember being even younger than that and seeing the pink slime gifs on the online. And once I saw it, I was like, oh, I guess they're regular chicken nuggets. And it's wild that you had a part in that. And it's something that it's so important to recognize, whether you are controlling or embracing a narrative. It has really, really long lasting effects, to the point where I can remember this random, I don't even eat McDonald's, and I can remember this random marketing campaign from 13, 14, 15 years ago. And it's just it's really cool to see how you have a role in that, and social media plays a role in that. I'm going to transition a little bit, because I guess we are talking about influencers in the B2B space. And in your original role, you were tasked with finding YouTube influencers. And now the YouTube influencers, just for example, Mr. Beast works in a 60-second ad that's actually entertaining to watch, in one of their videos, or in one of his videos that has hundreds of millions of views, to the point where I don't skip over it, and I skip over every ad. And so I'm curious. Maybe, I guess you typically work in the B2C space, but in the B2B space, how do you see influencer marketing changing? And when I say B2B, I'm thinking more like traditional tech companies, because I work in the iPaaS industry. There's not a whole lot of iPaaS influencers. I'm sure there's plenty of other industries that are B2B that do have influencers, but I'm curious how you've seen the B2B influencer space change. And you can also mention B2C, of course, but how has that changed from kind of the Wild West days of YouTube to like the Mr. Beast days of now? What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think with B2B specifically, I think there was like this, like even in like early on when I first started in social, I was like, I'd be asked to help kind of on more of like a corporate or B2B type program. I'm like, I don't know if I'm the right person for that, because my experience is really B2C. And, I think it couldn't have been further from the truth that my experience and insight wouldn't have warranted that, because what I've seen with B2B, I feel like over the last few years, and again, as you mentioned, I'm more B2C, and you see this narrative in this across LinkedIn and other places, but like, we're all people at the end of the day. Like, you're B2B, you're connecting with people, an individual or individuals, to highlight your business or your service on how that organization can utilize it. So it's ultimately a user experience and a person that's making that decision. So I think you've seen probably more B2C tactics fold into B2B now, because I feel like those lines are blurring a little bit, because ultimately you want to see how the end user, whether or not it's a huge corporation that's using it for kind of like its organization, or if it's ultimately going to be more of a individual user thing, how the end user is actually going to be able to use that. So I think there's not necessarily a permission, but just an awakening almost, that the ways of B2B from an influencer standpoint that used to be are not the ways that they need to be now, because you're having turnovers in leadership. A younger generation is coming through, more younger workers are coming through that are used to having these interactions with influencers, and knows what works with their kind of target audience. So I think you're seeing probably a little bit more of that personal aspect in B2B, and how it affects your employees, your end users, or whomever the target is for it, is it's less corporate. It feels less stiff. It feels more relatable from a like person to person, peer to peer, human to human level, to use that. And I think that works, because you have to break through. I mean, I imagine the folks, if you're trying to do kind of a B2B thing, you can get glossed over easily if it feels too salesy. And that's the same thing with B2C, right? If it feels too promotional, feels too corporate, it's going to get glossed over. And so I think that some of those tactics that you're seeing in B2C are folding into B2B, and it seems like it's become a more more creative, more opportunity for creativity in the B2B space, from not only just a social standpoint but influencer standpoint.
I think you hit the nail on the head, because there's certain posts as a B2B social media manager that I have to make that are, hey, we're attending this event, we're going to be at this conference, because people need to know that information and figure out what booth we're going to be at, and those posts do well. But the posts that really hit are the ones that I put humor and personality and thought and effort and heart into, and those are the types of posts that really drive B2C social media. The ones that sound like they come from a person rather than an AI generated robot. And so as B2B continues to evolve, I think the more that we can learn from B2C the better. And so I'm very thankful to have folks like you and just B2C in general to kind of lead the way and make sure that I don't make a huge mistake. So thank you. With that in mind, I mentioned just like an AI robot creating things and how that is not ideal, whether you're B2B or B2C. Mark, my co-host, and I are frequently talking about AI in terms of supply chain management, in terms of ERP implementation, in terms of error management and iPaaS. But I think that you and I have a very different experience and use case with AI, where it's content generation, it's content creation, whether that's literal images, videos, written, writing, and things like that. I'm kind of curious how you see AI changing the role of both PR, social media professionals, maybe now and then maybe 5 years down the line. Is it positive? Is it negative? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's I think it's going to play a huge role, and it's already starting to. And I know it's kind of in its infancy from like almost like a mass adoption standpoint. But I think you kind of hit it a little bit on the head with kind of some of the use cases. It's content generation, it's copy generation, it's idea generation, right? Like it's almost like you can use, and I'm not gonna lie, I have Chat GPT open right now. I was trying to kind of help brainstorm some things and like ways in for some things. And so like, I think it helps from a brainstorming standpoint. It can help you kind of when you don't have somebody to bounce an idea off of or something like that, you can put something in and it can give you that thought starter. And I think and with PR, I think there's going to be huge implications from like, you could write a press release about X topic and that hits on these 3 points, and it could do that. And that's amazing. Write a pitch for me, that kind of stuff on these things that hits on these 3 points. And so I think that's great. But one of the things that it loses is that personable standpoint, that relatability, as you were talking about those things that kind of hit, I think it will get more difficult over time, but right now you can kind of tell when things are AI has written something. It feels void of that kind of human nature and that humanity part. But I think as this goes on, like this is Chat GPT started coming out like 9 months ago, right? From a public standpoint. It's going to get better. It's going to learn, and it's going to be a little bit more difficult. So I think it actually puts the onus on you as a professional, whether in PR, social, whatever industry, to get better and to make sure you're not lax on it. So, because I think it's going to only get better, more difficult to do, but I think it's a tool, and it has immense kind of positives, like doing a mid journey or something like that, of creating images. Like I've looked at every stock image on the internet, I don't like it, I'm going to plug in something that I want on mid journey, and it's going to have this image which actually is really cool and it fits for this pitch deck that I'm doing, or this or this presentation that I need. From a social standpoint, it can help with topics. It can help with kind of answering questions and things like that. That's one of the biggest things. I actually use AI as like a search engine now versus like Google, where I'm getting dozens and dozens of pages of stuff. Like, I'm looking for a specific answer to a question. I plug it in. There it is. Of course, I want to verify that to make sure it's actually right, but it gives me an easier, like a starting point. And that's what I've been using AI as, for me, is starting points on ideas and thinking and answers and stuff like that. But I do think it's going to have a big impact on social media professionals and PR professionals. I think a lot from a writing standpoint, but also from a creative idea generation and design standpoint. I think it will make a big impact. But I think that's why it's important for us as PR professionals, social professionals, to understand the use cases and how it works, so we can be the ones that are employing it and not the other way around.
That's a fantastic take on it. And I think 99% of what you just mentioned is the positive side of things. And actually, last night, right before bed, I was watching a YouTube video, and an ad came on that was some political ad. I have no idea who it was about or which side it was for, but it was using an AI generated video of a specific politician with an AI generated voice. And I didn't even notice because I was on my phone while the ad was going on, but I was kind of paying attention, and I saw it said, "This is a parody advertisement brought to you by XYZ." And I was like, wow, like, if I wasn't in a field that has adopted AI heavily, in the tech space, maybe just a younger person in general, like, this is a little bit scary. And one of the few things that we haven't talked about on this podcast, me and you, and just the podcast in general, is like the negative side of AI. Obviously, you're working with huge, customers, Dyson, McDonald's, dryers, things like that, both currently and in the past, and you're not going to use AI to generate anything terrible for them. But I'm curious if the negative side of AI, of political advertisements, where they're generating facial images to look like someone else, whether that's just a photo or video, deep fakes, things like that. Do the positives outweigh the negatives? And if yes or no, why?
That's a good question. I
know we're getting ethical today. Sorry.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of it, like, so what your example, right, of like a political ad being completely AI generated, and it's like, if my parents probably would not have known the difference, right? And that's
my
scary,
first thought,
right? And that's scary, because some people that aren't paying attention, and there are some people who I'm older than you, but like that are in and around our age, that aren't in our field, that aren't paying attention, that might think it's real too, that just, it goes over their head. And so I think that there are real pitfalls, right? And I think you see that with some of the creators of these things, like the creators of ChatGPT and other AI things, that are even in front of Congress saying we actually need regulation around some of these things, because they understand that there are pitfalls and dangers and negatives that can be for bad actors who can use that for negative purposes or for their own gain. And I think it's going to be a point where, brands and agencies and holding companies and things like that, where there will have to be some sort of stand about, like, what is the compliance with AI? Obviously, anything we do with AI, we would have to note that, right? Like, this was generated with AI or something like. So we're very transparent at Golin about our use of AI, especially with outputs of things. But I think a lot of it is going to be on how we as people use it. I like to think the best of humanity and the best in people. I'm usually an optimist and like to say that it's going to be used for good and for positive things, but you can't, you have to be a realist and know that some of these things are going to be negative, and some of these things can be negative about your brand, right? It can be negative about, if you're or about your client and things like that. And so then you're going to have to it's going to make that much more work for you to figure out how you protect against that. So I think right now, for me, at this point, some of the positives are outweighing the negatives a little bit, but I can certainly see a world where the negatives are equal, if not outweighing the positives because of how people use it. It only takes a small subsection of folks to kind of really bring that negative over, because we tend to focus on the negative more than the positive. There can be 1,000 positive comments on a post, right? But you, as a social media manager, Jordan, no, you're focusing on those 10 that are like, man, why are those negative, right? But there's 100 that are positive, but you're focusing on the negative parts. So we tend to focus on those, and I feel like that might be how it is with AI. But my hope is that the positive stuff outweighs the negative for as much as possible.
It's interesting. I was reading an article on Vice recently about Bing's AI-powered image creator, which is powered by OpenAI's DALL-E, and people were able to create some like very inappropriate images using that service. And I mean, obviously, it's just individuals doing it. It's not on, it's not like massive companies are publishing these, but it's just, and we don't have to get into the nitty gritty of this, but it's just interesting how that kind of overlays with free speech and right to, people's rights to create things, to say what they want, to use tools, whether people view that as a good thing or a bad thing, that maybe those types of restrictions will be put on or won't. But it's just, I don't know, I feel like we're kind of on the precipice, on the fence of the positives and negatives of AI. I'm in the same boat where I think that, yeah, there's a few bad apples, and that's okay. They'll probably weed themselves out. And I'm typically positive about it. And I've had nothing but a great experience utilizing AI so far. And so I'm hoping that, more people tend to take our approach when it comes to seeing the positives and using it for positive rather than negative and unethical reasons. But anyways, okay, we've been talking about some pretty heavy stuff in terms of social media, in terms of PR, in terms of AI in general. I want to change it for the last little third of this interview to something a little bit lighter, and something that I think you've mastered really, really well, and I've observed you do it really, really well. But I'm curious when you decided to turn your LinkedIn profile into like a educational network or like a social media manager hub, and why specifically you chose LinkedIn. So I'll just kind of leave that as an open door.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for that. I would say, like, I've been on LinkedIn for a while. I don't know for how long. It's probably been 10. I think it's probably been 10 plus years, probably. But it was one of those things. I signed up, did it, mainly just because I was in the social space and wanted to check out the platforms and knew what I was talking about, those types of things. I think I really started to, like, in most of my probably like pre-20, like 19, 2018, I was probably just doing more like link sharing, updates on social media platforms and stuff like that, sharing like funny things that I thought were interesting. And I would say probably 2020, when we all went into our, working from home and doing all that stuff, when COVID first hit, and I wasn't engaging in IRL with colleagues and friends as much, writing kind of became an outlet for me. And I was always active on Twitter. I did that a lot. That was my favorite platform. No longer is. But LinkedIn was a place where I started to, like, I felt like Twitter was my quick hits and stuff like that. LinkedIn, I was doing more like, I hate the term thought leadership kind of thing, but like I was doing more things about what I thought of the social industry, work culture, PR industry. So I was doing a little bit more longer form of those types of things. And it just, like, I think one post or two posts, and then one post did well. And I was like, this is, people seem to relate to this. And that's a big thing for me is relatability, whether or not it's an experience that I've had or an experience that I've observed others have, and putting it out there. And so people know that there are other folks that kind of have the same experience or going through the same things. And so I started to kind of focus on that a little bit, especially focus on LinkedIn in 2020, probably when everybody started working, most of our industry started working from home and doing those types of things. And so that was one of the things, is that it was a creative outlet for me, both for Twitter and for LinkedIn. And I kept doing more of the LinkedIn, like a little bit more of like sharing about my experience on things I've worked on, or just sharing kind of positive things about work culture. And then it kind of morphed a little bit more into kind of like, I can share this on Twitter, so why wouldn't I share this on LinkedIn too? Going back to our kind of B2B conversation, while it's a corporate social network or whatever, it's for business, we're all people on there, right? Like whether or not you're running a brand page on there or you're just doing it individually, you're a human on this page, and there's a good chance you relate to a lot of stuff. So that's when I started like kind of folding in memes and other work-related humor and stuff like that, especially in 2020 when we were all like, what is going on? We don't know what to do. Especially so some of that work-related humor, and it started to resonate with people. And so I kind of kept going in that direction. I love to, I mix in the humor with some more just like general like perspective on social or perspective on work life and culture and stuff like that. But that's kind of what I try to do. And everything I try to do comes from a place of relatability, of whether it's based on my experience, whether it was last week or last year or 2 years ago. Some things will just resurface in my brain about a situation I was in and do that. But that's kind of like, it really kind of started to focus on LinkedIn in 2020. And one of the things I love about LinkedIn is for the most part, it's a positive place. And also the long tail of your posts is kind of crazy on LinkedIn. It's, you used like with Twitter, it would be like 17 minutes after you post. If you don't get it in, then it's done, or 24 hours, it's gone. With LinkedIn, you get people, engaging with your posts like 6 months later, or, 2 weeks down the line, things like that. And so it's the long tail of it too, is that it's an evergreen platform too, which I really enjoyed. So that was kind of 2020 is when I started to do my focus and kind of how I started to, create on there.
That's awesome. I think I got on the train a little bit later, but I kind of had the same realization. Everything that you said resonates quite a bit with me, in addition to the fact that there's so many people on LinkedIn and so few creators. And so it really is just like a ripe channel for, personal brand building, regular brand building, networking in general. And so, I mean, if you look at my profile and you look at yours, I definitely model a lot of what I've been doing over the past year plus from what I've seen you do, because not only do I know it works, but it's actually really interesting and it's really engaging, and it's a really cool way to network, develop friends, create a community in a business setting that most people probably don't look at it that way, but they still engage with it in a really positive and fun way. So in terms of, building your own personal brand, I think a lot of people can take note from what you do. I've tried to do the same, and it's been really cool to see how you've succeeded on the platform. With that in mind, what is the current state of LinkedIn, and do you think that LinkedIn will be the platform for the next 5 years, or is someone going to swoop in and make something better, more interesting, more engaging, more professional, less professional? How do you see LinkedIn's role both for individual creators and brands moving, maybe in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for the kind words, Jordan. I appreciate that. And so you have some bangers on yours, man. So you're doing great on the content I see on LinkedIn as well. And as far as your question goes, I think I feel like some of the I feel like now LinkedIn, there are some there's like some perception of like there's like LinkedIn bros or broetry, or like thread boys are now on LinkedIn and doing all that stuff. And I think there is that. There are people on LinkedIn who probably are using AI to create posts and just slapping it on there. And it's kind of a lot of the same stuff. And I'm all for repurposing. I do it. You should be doing people should be doing it, right? But like they write the same stuff and do it over and over again. And so there's that faction, but I think I think they get a lot of attention, but I don't think that is kind of like what the norm is. I see LinkedIn continuing to be a place that evolves in how business is in the modern world in 2023. I don't think LinkedIn when it started would have worked the way it is now, but given, kind of how a younger generation, Gen Z and millennials who have grown into kind of now like mid to senior level roles, they're Gen Xers who are using it, younger Gen Xers who are using it differently than maybe older generations who think like business is business and it has to be this and we have to talk about this, which is not all folks that say that. But I think just the way that a younger generation thinks about their interactions with work and with business is changing. And I think that is going to model a little bit more on kind of how you see LinkedIn evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. I only think it's going to get a little bit, the blending of personal and professional is going to continue, in my opinion, unless LinkedIn steps in and makes some sort of kind of decision. I know that they, like earlier in the year, they changed the algorithm where it was like they were suppressing certain things. And I know I felt it, certain things and promoting different things. And so I think they probably will still do that, but I think it's going to be a blending of personal and professional, especially as a younger generation continues to kind of new users come onto the platform and do that. And I think that that's okay. And then I think that kind of use case makes it a little bit easier for brands who might have been hesitant to engage or put content out there to jump into that. Because like if you look at Duolingo on TikTok and X and whatever, Twitter, and Threads about how, and versus how they are on LinkedIn, they are still, I would say they're not so like very corporate on LinkedIn, but they're not as far on kind of their, they're not as far as they're going as far as they do on TikTok and like Twitter or something like that. But they found a unique voice that doesn't feel like stiff and doesn't feel like too corporate on LinkedIn, that works for them. And I think you're going to start to see brands being able to do like that it makes sense for, start to feel more comfortable in having more of a personable voice versus a corporate voice on LinkedIn. And sure, there's going to be certain things that we have to put out there, company statements, press releases, not press releases. I wouldn't want to put a press release on LinkedIn, but like corporate statements, stuff like that, reaction things, CEO, CMO statements, things like that, that you're going to have to do. But I think as far as everyday content, like you just also have to look at, like, I think it's going to get more personable, and you'll just have to look at who your audience is. Like if you have, most of your audience is 50 plus, maybe talking in, slang terms that a Gen Z generation is using, probably not the best way. But if your audience is young professionals, 25 to 35, you can probably have a little bit more leeway with kind of how your voice is there. And so I think it'll be brand by brand, but I think you'll start to see more brands be comfortable using it as a platform to engage with in a less corporate way moving forward.
I think you hit the nail on the head. My only concern is that LinkedIn continues to adapt and develop with this influx of new younger users. And, they see that this content that maybe isn't as traditional or corporate does the best on their platform. Mm-hmm. And they figure out additional tools, services, methods to allow those brands and those creators to shine. Because I think LinkedIn is pretty set in their ways, and I think they have a really good product. I also think that there's probably a few tweaks that they need to make in the coming 2-3 years to really embrace the change that you just discussed is coming. And I think if they do that, they're going to really, really set themselves up to be they already are the business social media platform, but I think they can take advantage of the virality of places like Twitter and TikTok to really create a much more engaging and fun place for professionals to exist. I think they're close, but just based on the content that you create on there, the content that I create on there, it is a fun place. And I'm a social media manager, and I don't love social media in my personal life. I consume it, but I don't post on it. But I do on LinkedIn because it's fun to talk about grown-up things in a fun manner. Mm-hmm. And whether that's a promotion or a work success or a meme about my job, it really is a good place. So I'm hoping that it continues to grow and change in the ways that you mentioned.
Yeah. And I think with that, like, it has to have a differentiation from Facebook, right? It can't become Facebook. It can't be a place where it has the purpose. It is your, like you said, it's the business social network, and it's a professional where we're sharing kind of things about business life. If you want to mix in personal stuff, I think that's okay. I think you should be your whole true self on LinkedIn and wherever you're going to be. But I'm not going to post pictures of my daughter necessarily there, because you know what? I'm saving that for my family and for, my close friends and stuff like that. I'll talk about my daughter, but am I and how it relates to something. Like, one post I had was that I get to take time. I'm grateful that I have an organization that allows flexibility for PTO, that I could take a Wednesday off and spend it with my daughter, and go strawberry picking after her school, like stuff like that. So I think there are ways to get personal that showcase the professional side of you too, and the personal side. And that's what that's the thing, is I think it'll continue to get more personable, but my hope is that it doesn't lose that professional aspect of it, because that's what makes it unique. If it loses that, then it becomes a Facebook, or it becomes something else. And, the professional side of things is, let's be honest, when we're employed and we make money, and that's how we support family and get the things that we need. And so part of that LinkedIn, one of the reasons I check LinkedIn is to look for advice for people who are in the same industry, or places I may want to go with, in my leadership style, or other things. And so my hope is it doesn't lose that core value of it, because learning to grow as a professional, business professional, or professional in general, that's a core reason why I use it and keep going back to it as well, is to find those things. And mixing in with the personal is great. And, I think that bring your whole self to work and to LinkedIn. But again, one of the reasons I use it too is for growth as a professional, and look to others and peers to kind of get, hear their experience, see their experience as well, and maybe other challenges that they have, and how we can, learn to overcome those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like the concept of bring your whole self to work. I'm going to scale that back and say 85%, because there's some people who
There you go.
definitely don't need to have their whole self on LinkedIn.
I agree. I'll agree with that, Jordan.
Perfect. And like you said, it does need to remain professional, but luckily there are checks and balances where if someone is acting non-professional, you can always take a screenshot, and if you feel so inclined, send it to the right person. Or there's other communities like LinkedIn lunatics on Reddit, where you see some truly unhinged things. That there are systems of checks and balances. And so I think LinkedIn will kind of self-regulate in a way to allow both new content creation and fun, but also ensure that there's not too much craziness. Yeah. Okay, so with that in mind, we're getting towards the end, and I don't want to take up all of your day, but I have two quick questions to wrap it up, and then I'll get you out of here because it is Friday. The first question is, I know we talked about kind of more traditional media early on in this podcast. I'm curious, what did working in radio, a format with no copy that you can't read, images that you can't see, what did that teach you about, perhaps working in PR, marketing, promotion, and social media in general?
So I think the first thing it taught me is, because I was in the promotions department, it taught me about how to communicate with an audience, because my team and we were typically the first and sometimes only personal interaction that a listener had with the radio station. Most of the time, you're not going to have access to the DJs, or you're not going to be able to go to the radio station and do those types of things. And so typically it's a passive relationship, right? You're listening to it on the radio, and what I got to do was interact with people and hear their perspectives and get information from them about what they wanted from the radio station, what they liked, what they didn't, and then also hear, things of things we could be doing better and whatnot. And so I think it did teach me some communication skills on how to communicate with people. And then, I was also very friendly with a lot of the DJs, and observing and watching them do their thing in the studio helped me with improvisation, because they had most of them don't have a script, right? They're making up some of the stuff and looking at what was trending in the news and kind of going and riffing off of that. So it helped me kind of from a creativity standpoint of how I should consume things for creativity. to help with my creativity. And also improvisation. They had to improvise a lot of times too, even though a lot of that stuff is cut beforehand. But when they were live, they had to improvise in a lot of things. So kind of observing them helped me with that, which, as you well know, in this line of work, you have to improvise a lot, because most of the plans you have get you this far, and then you got to go off course, and you have to improvise kind of the next step. So those were the kind of the two things that really taught. Those were the things working in radio taught me about, or helped me in kind of where I am today.
That's awesome. That's a fantastic answer, and I think probably those things are still incredibly relevant today. So that's cool to hear. Lastly, one of the things that I always say, and this is my typical ending question, is we have a lot of C-level and VP level executives on this podcast. I think a lot of people listening, or a lot of people in work in general, view these people as kind of these technology robots that are, you fill them up with gas and oil and they run like this, and they don't really have a life outside of work. And something that I've learned doing this podcast is that every VP and C-level person is really interesting. They're all really personable. They're all really fun people, and they do a lot of stuff outside of work. And so in an effort to humanize you and help people realize that you're not some scary SVP overlord, tell the listeners before you go, just outside of work, what are your passions, hobbies, and interests?
Oh man. Well, I will say that my family is the most important thing, right? My daughter and my wife are the most important things to me. And so, spending most of my, out off of work time with my family, and raising my daughter, and seeing the world through her eyes, right? That's kind of one of the biggest things. But, for me, I do meditate. I like to meditate. So you probably find me meditating a little bit, listening to podcasts. You might see a guitar back here, which I try to play. I'm not great at it, or even really good at it, but I will try and strum that a little bit when I need a little inspiration and stuff like that. So I enjoy sports too. I played basketball in junior college, high school through junior college. And so really am a big fan of Chicago sports. Unfortunately, I guess, because Chicago sports aren't really that hot right now.
I'm from Oakland, man. I feel your pain.
Yeah. So, but yeah, big sports fan. So that also is a big thing for me, is just kind of taking in that. And, so those are kind of like some of the things too, that outside of kind of my work life, or kind of like consume my kind of my personal life.
Well, that's awesome, man. I'm glad the listeners got to at least get to know you on a personal level. I'm sure some SDR will listen to the very end of this podcast and reach out to you about Chicago sports or something of that nature.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I just wanted to say, Josh, thank you so much for joining us on the Technology Leadership podcast of Celigo. This has been a really fantastic episode, diving into some things that we typically don't dive into. So just wanted to say thank you for your time and attention. You're a fantastic guest. And for those of you still listening, we'll see you around next week. Bye, everybody.
Bye.